Anyone desperately need more time? Okay, give me some ideas about the individuals in your lives or the groups that you find particularly challenging when it comes to climate change. Where are the difficulties? Is that what you were discussing, or is it something else? Do you have particular groups of people in your life that you just know that's a really difficult area to talk about?
Well, it seems to come up, well, sort of a few people voiced it, in relation to people that we know who make particular choices about, for example, taking long flights, having ostentatious cars or holidays, and finding it difficult to sort of almost wanting to challenge that. But then the discussion was, well, when does that get into a judgment about those people? And that's often where it gets sticky and alienating. So we sort of just started talking about, could I have an opinion about that person but not make a harsh judgment about their choices, which are different to mine? It doesn't mean that they're wrong.
Okay, all right, go on.
I just, looking back, it's like we're all perfect now, but, you know, way back, you know, fast cars, you know, I was asleep, I think, is the best way of looking at it. And I think it's easy to judge people, and I've gone through, I'm still going through the supermarket descent, gradually weaning my life off supermarkets and stuff like that. And it's a process. I've been a vegetarian since I was 18. I'm still not, I'm not vegan, but I'm getting there, you know, and I don't want to be criticised for not quite being there.
Sure.
So these are the sort of things that I'm you know, worried about, that we criticise each other needlessly. We should just say, look, it's a journey. I think that's the only way of describing it.
Yes.
People away as well.
Yeah.
Yes. The trouble is that there's a sense of real urgency now.
Yes.
We have 8 years of carbon budget left, and so as much as we'd all like to move there slowly over the next 50 years, there's an imperative. That's the trouble, isn't it? That's the real issue. What about over here? Yeah, go on.
So there's like an alternative conversation to judging other people is like wanting to try and protect other people as well. So older people, or people who are ill, or people who are struggling with things, and having a conversation with them.
I mean, do you find yourself sort of more tolerant of certain groups, for example? I mean, I certainly do. You know, I mean, when I see a young family, for example, I sort of think, oh, blimey, I remember being there, and actually you can hardly think about anything other than getting through the day, can't you? And I sort of have a great, you know, very inconsistent tolerance for certain groups such as that, you know. What about in the workplace? Do people have difficulties there, or do you manage to can it, or
weaning myself off the workplace?
Well, literally just leaving work rather than have those conversations.
Don't bother with staff rooms anymore.
Really? Really? So go on, tell me, what do you find so awful about the staff room?
Well, just that absolutely, completely ignoring it, and I did leaflets, you know, please, read just useful stuff, and you could see it would be shoved in the recycling or just covered or completely ignored, and people don't want to talk about it. And also talking about your existence can sometimes just really make people angry, because I think they feel defensive, because they know who you are and maybe what you represent, and then you're just walking into the stuff. Yes. So it's just best to keep it out, do you find? Stay away.
Have you got some like-minded souls at work? Yes, you've got some support, yeah.
A similar thing we came up with is, I said, I'm quite a coward. I can talk to anybody about everything, but not climate change. You know, I talk to anybody in the street and supermarket neighbours.
Right.
But I self-edit.
Right. On climate change.
Yeah.
Go on. So can you give me an example as such? You know, is this with?
I think it's because I don't want any confrontation, and you know, I don't want to say, well, don't do that.
And how avoiding it, I completely understand, but how does that make you feel if you're actually having to avoid this subject?
I think a lot what comes up for me is that there's with certain people, with friends who have made their position clear and I don't want to lose their friendship, so there's this barrier and you can talk about certain things but not others, so like with neighbours, it's like...
And is your friendship the same?
No,
No.
it's not, but
No, it's not. So, yeah.
I feel like I have the same but opposite problem in that I feel like with colleagues when they say like, oh, how was your weekend? And we've done something for XR, I'll be like, well, now you've asked, like,
Yeah.
what did you do? You know, like I feel like I'm not self-editing enough. Like I'm just like I'm ready to like. You know,
Tell them.
And then I have the same problem a completely different way, which is then obviously there's like a barrier there.
From them.
From them, and then with work colleagues I don't mind so much, but with friends then you don't want barriers there.
Yeah, yeah. But you don't self-centre. You still roll in there.
I
And
do a bit. Like I'm not like just running around town. But yeah, I don't censor as much as perhaps I should, or maybe should is the wrong word. But
well, you're looking pretty healthy on it, so no one's slapped you yet or whatever. Yeah.
no black eyes yet.
No. There was a hand over here.
Yeah.
Oh, did you?
Well, I'm just thinking, wasn't it in the olden days when we had dinner parties and things like that, the three subjects you didn't talk about were sex, politics and religion.
Yeah.
And now we've had to add climate change to that list.
Yeah.
Because it's a real downer. We go, you know, we
Yeah.
had such a good time until you mentioned that. You know. So I don't know if we take it off the list or whether we just get rid of it.
Yes. I must admit, the last dinner party I went to about 6 months ago, everyone was sat there and talked about their bathrooms and their holidays, and it was like, get me out of here. I thought, I'm never going to one of these again. But yeah, go on.
Well, I was just going to say one of the things that I found quite effective is like just not talking necessarily about climate change, but talking about the positives, you know, and saying, oh look, I've just switched to people like Bold and greenest, but you know, I've got £50 off because I'm at this green energy company, or I switched to Treeless Bank, do you know they've got really good savings thing, or I've just been to a local camping holiday, or I don't know, just the positives of doing some action rather than, or adapting the message to what they're interested in.
It's a really good point.
That doesn't really inspire anybody to do much.
Yes.
It's worrying, but it can be disempowering as well.
Yes. Yes. Did everyone hear that? I mean, that's a point that we'll come back to, is about sort of just being positive about this message as being perhaps one of the most effective communication tools.
Yeah, and that's why things like Game Changers with veganism, and it's been amazing. Some of my colleagues here last year, I organised Veganuary, and they were joking about organising a meat fest at the same time. Anyway, they watched it, and now one of them's like, two of them actually have turned vegetarian and sort of on the route to veganism because they've seen the health benefit of that. It's not a climate thing.
Yes, and it kind of it came from a neutral source.
Yes,
it wasn't.
They watched independently.
Yes. I mean, I always joke. My son watched Cowspiracy a few years ago, and cut my shopping bill by a third. Down to a third because, from being a 3 metre day boy, he was sort of, that's fine, Mum, I won't eat meat anymore. Oh, really? But so it's amazing. Those neutral sources of information can be quite powerful, can't they? If you can get others to watch them or listen to them. Yeah. Any other thoughts about who and where we have difficulties?
I have one more, which is that I do lots of work with corporates and leaders in corporate businesses, and trying to get them to really engage with climate change is difficult. I tend to do it by stealth and get them to do things, and then they realise what it's about. But having those direct conversations is difficult.
Are you talking to them on other issues generally? Leadership, right?
We talk about leadership without actually talking about climate. I don't know how that's possible.
Okay.
Yeah, so I bring it in by stealth.
Gosh, that's really interesting. But these are corporates who are having to look, presumably 10, 15 years down the line for their business model, their profits, and you're having to introduce it.
Yeah.
Wow, that's worrying.
In a leadership development context, not a consultancy business strategy context, in a personal development context.
Yes, you'd kind of hope it was top of their agenda or high up there. Yeah.
It's not.
Okay. All right. Okay, anything anybody else wants to throw in there at the moment?
I mean, it's interesting that you say people have trouble talking about the climate. But I would have thought most people in this room, and quite a long way back in terms of being an eco-warrior, I've come to learn today, and cowering because of everybody else is much further along it. But you must feel a huge obligation to evangelise all the time, because you've made decisions which are so out of the ordinary compared with so much of the business world, so much of the corporate world, and yet you are going to meet those people.
Mm.
And as you said, there's hardly any time left.
Yeah.
And so because of that, you must want to evangelise all the while.
Yes.
And what you're saying is so challenging, but you've got to keep on saying it, surely. Because if you don't keep on saying it, you're not going to
achieve any difference. Well, I'm sure if I asked most of you in this room, you'd probably say you were partly exhausted with this, yes? Is that a common feeling? It's just a level of exhaustion of that sense of, you know, having to carry that load yourself another day and operate out in a world that doesn't still, despite all the changes over the last year, doesn't get it. I saw a hand up there, go on.
No, put it down again.
Did you? Okay, there's a hand up here.
Yeah, no, I'm just going to say, you've got a point, but the trouble is if what you say is going to turn people away and make that and piss them off, it's not necessarily helpful, which is partly what some of the people are saying, like Alex in the staff room, and that's an issue I've found in certain areas as well. It's like if I say it, it's going to be challenging and going to...
But how do you win otherwise? But how do you win otherwise? It's about like the Brexit argument. If you didn't argue for Remain, in the end the Brexiteers won, but I mean we had confrontation after confrontation after confrontation.
But I think that's quite a good analogy, isn't it? Because the point is, how do you have that conversation? How do you be quite forceful in what you're saying, and or in whatever way it is, but without judging the person? So, you know, we are all on a journey. We all have carbon sins every day, you know, whatever it is. It's that question, isn't it, about how you talk to people about this without them feeling that they are very personally being judged. You're right now, actually, third time. Go.
I was just thinking about a conversation I had with people. I was training people not in any area to do with climate or ecological emergency, and it was lunchtime, and they were just sitting around the table, and this woman was talking about flying to Africa, and she wanted to see this animal and that animal, and everybody was talking about their holidays to Africa, and I kind of got to the level that I was ignoring it, and then I just went, only 4% of animals left are actually wild. And if you want to go, you better go quickly, because 200 species a day are becoming extinct. And then everybody went, oh, right.
The nutter in the corner.
They didn't speak again.
But did you feel better for having said it?
Well, I just couldn't help it. I just thought, I can't let you carry on thinking that you can just, you know, fly around the world and, you know, well, I want to go and live in Africa and I like elephants. And, you know, it's just so naive and just so wrong. I just couldn't bear it.
How old, roughly, was this person?
Well, there was a very mixed group, but it was a young girl. She was early 20s that was saying this. Like, so this was going to be something she could do in the future. It was a choice for her. And it was just like...
Yes. And looking back, did you sit there afterwards and think, maybe was there another way you could have done it? Or well, did you get it wrong? You may not have got it wrong, but I'm just wondering what you thought afterwards. Did you sort of regret it, or did you?
No, I wondered how she felt about that, because I'm also, as a trainer, she was sitting there listening to me, and in that area, obviously the area I train, I've got a lot more knowledge than she has. So she may well have been looking at me thinking, well, she really knows her shit. And then when I said that, she may well have gone, oh, okay, now she's telling me this. And that I didn't, you know, she didn't obviously want to hear it, but maybe it would have an impact. I don't know.
Yes. Go on.
I wanted to say something to you about the evangelizing. I think when you look around the room, there are a lot of people here who are known for what we've done in Frome. Everybody knows I ride a bike, nothing else. Everybody knows Cordelia grows food for us to grow. Everybody knows what Peter does. And, you know, I mean, you could quote person after person And I don't go around and say, oh, I've never driven a car, but people know. And I might be sort of the quirky outsider, but I'm hoping that they think it's a way one can live.
So a positive example, modelling, basically. What you're doing is modelling behaviour without talking about it.
I know I understand the urgency, and it may take 200 years for everybody to ride a bike, but yeah.
Well, there's another issue about just what is the most effective way to bring about change and the most effective way to communicate, and modelling is certainly...
Yeah, but it's not. Yeah. So I remember somebody saying to me, if I'm carrying a carrier bag and I see you coming, I cross the street.
Right, yeah. My friends tell me they run around the house before I come and turn everything off and hide stuff, yeah.
So that's not particularly positive bit of modelling, to be honest.
Well, it makes them think.
It makes them think, yeah.
You know, is there any harm done?
And anyway, I probably come from Lidl's and I've hidden my carrier.
Yeah.
Because there's so many assumptions in here.
Yes, yeah. Go on.
I mean, the thing is, and the reason why I don't want to get judgmental about people who make different choices to me, like, for example, flying, is because it's not their personal fault about the climate. It's not that person's fault about what's happening. And because I think the fault is there are bigger, massive issues at systemic level, political, geopolitical, global. So, that's one reason why I think it's not worth it.
Yeah, but
I
think...
Is that the right... Yeah. It's not appropriate to start making people feel like they're personally blamed for their lifestyle choices. Because I feel like with flying, okay, well, you might as well fly now because in 50 years' time you won't be able to. It could say on one level.
Okay, I wouldn't agree with that, but I mean, I get your point. Basically, we live in an economy that's is structured towards the consumption of fossil fuels. It's structured towards mass consumption. Our whole economy runs on consumer spending. That's that depends on our growth, and that's feeds into every indicator of our economic well-being and so on. So yes, our whole economy is orientated the wrong way. But there is a question now. The question is knowing what we know. We are the first generation that cannot deny the knowledge. We know it. And yet we're not changing. And so, yes, sure, we still have to eat, we still have to be warm, and so on. But there are some behaviours that are optional, for which one might feel, it's about time you got on the...
I found it, just my last point, more powerful this is the modelling thing, to talk about myself and my choices.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, I've chosen not to fly because I feel like it's not a responsible thing to do.
Yeah.
It's much more easy to say that than you're wrong.
Yes, sure. Go on.
I've started to get quite focused on the real problem, I think, and that's the problem that we could all make these judgments, like, which milk do I buy, which one's got the lowest carbon footprint. And I'm sick of making these calculations in my head because I can't reach a conclusion. It's too complicated. And we must all be there. Well, can I fly this year if I didn't drive a car at all, if I was a vegan, if I got, all these things, does that give me a license to fly? Because that's my CO2.
Okay, I think we can answer that.
No, I mean, if that was my only footprint of the year, apart from heating the house and the music. But, that's a conversation we're not having because we don't know the answer. But the answer could be given to us by the government. And the government is doing nothing to tell us what we should do. And there'll be a lot of people who won't do anything because they don't have to. And they're not going to be self-enlightened and they're not going to change their lifestyle. And unfortunately, we got to the stage where the government needs to act like it's an emergency. And that's where I'm focusing my anger. I'm trying not to make other people feel bad. Yeah. It's very easy to do.
Yes.
But that's where, someone said to me to do with signing one of these things to do with not flying. And she said, can you ask your councillors, green councillors, how many of them fly this year or want to fly this year? And I wrote back and said, actually, I think you should ask all the councillors if they're going to fly or reduce their flights. But, you know, then I went on to explain that we don't know whether this is something that would be permitted in a descent plan that the government hasn't formulated yet. This is what's driving me bloody mental. And that's my real anger, sorry. I've got it out there now.
Yeah, okay, yeah. No, we can all agree a lack of leadership is a really fundamental part of the problem. You know, we haven't had an energy policy for the last 10 years. We certainly haven't had any climate leadership as such, and so that is a big issue. I do think we're now at the point now we're talking about, I mean, we've inserted this term carbon neutrality by 2030 as if and I think, as I think Greta Thunberg has said, you know, we're working towards 2030 on the basis that, hey, we'll just plant more trees. I mean, we always needed the trees. You know, 2 years ago when I was here, you know, we needed the trees to start, you know, to start sequestering carbon. But now they're being used, and we're talking about direct air capture, carbon capture and storage, and so on. We're talking about technologies and strategies that will allow us to basically keep having a budget for aviation and everything. So what I'm saying is we're now in the position, really, if you understand this, where every one of us needs to stop using fossil fuels by 2030 at the latest, if not before. And so in that calculation in our mind as to whether there's a carbon budget that we could have in our head, you know, because I'm doing the recycling or I'm not driving a car or whatever, I think those days are gone. We literally each have to look at every bit of our lives and say, where are the fossil fuels? How do I, one by one, get rid of them? And, you know, in the end, with a non-leading government, in the end, we only have personal action. And the truth is, you know, as we all know, in 10 years' time, 15 years' time, we're all going to have to look back and say, what did I do? What did I do when I knew? That's the terrible thing. And as, again, very poignantly, we keep hearing from Greta Thunberg and Kevin Anderson and others, just how much do we love our children and our grandchildren? We keep saying we do, but just how much? Enough to change our banks, enough to change our electricity suppliers, enough to turn our TVs off at the wall? Really? Is that so much? You know, so we you know, the challenges really are there.
But you've just flipped the conversation for the first time to talking about a positive value which almost everybody has that we can agree on, which is love for the next generation.
Yeah.
And I think that links with the Brexit comment, where the Remain campaign largely focused on financial rewards of remaining, how much better we were going to be financially, which isn't actually, despite everybody's publicising it, isn't a big motivator for most of us. The Leave campaign used much more emotive feeling work. If we engage with the feeling somebody has, whether it's love or respect, and work from those, we are more likely to be able to change their behaviour and or their thoughts. And we have a much safer route in through finding common value and then talking that common value.
Very good point. Yes, indeed, indeed. I do think actually even when I hear myself talking about it, how much do we love our children and our grandchildren, of course, actually, I've always felt that narrative about, because it immediately pushes the problem down to the next generation, as if that's true, and it's no longer true. I'm worried about my life. I'm worried about whether there's going to be chaos when I'm at my most vulnerable. Will there be a functioning NHS? Will there be a food security, a government? Will I die in pain? You know, that's my worry. I mean, it's no longer just about our next generation. That's the trouble. So anyway, I mean, I guess, as I said, the last time I was at a dinner party, I guess this is what we've been talking about. I find myself bored, irritable, feeling alien and separate, feel like I'm being asked for approval of somebody else's big holidays, their big cars, their big decisions, and I just feel I cannot give that approval anymore. I feel utterly frustrated, despairing. I feel my views are disrespected sometimes when somebody knows very strongly what I feel, and there are times when I sort of feel, well, you're not taking on board my concerns. So I guess we've covered most of that. So how do we deal with it? I mean, these are just some of this is just how I react to it. But generally, as I say, I'm not consistently tolerant. So sometimes, you know, particularly with the very elderly or young families, or when I see a young couple kissing on the street and I think, oh God, it's just, why should they have to bear this burden? You know, this is terrible. And I sort of still forgive them anything almost. And then I guess we all indulge in this one, emphasising the more relevant issues. You know, okay, let's deal with plastics, let's deal with air quality, let's deal with cutting your energy bills and so on and like that. It's sort of divert it into smaller, more manageable pieces. I guess my strategy more and more over the last year has been to just simply disengage, like yourself, but particularly in those conversations to refuse to show approval. And I find that's actually quite powerful when people are trying to tell you about their wonderful holidays and their wonderful cars and so on, just to say, oh, that's nice. Or sometimes I'll go, well, I hope you planted a lot of trees, you know, sort of a rather dismissive, you know, I just cannot do it anymore in terms of kind of buying into their story. Like you, I sometimes get on the aggressive and I tell them, do you know, we've got 8 years of budget left? And as somebody said, you know, send them Greta Thunberg's clip, or Kevin Anderson is my favourite climate scientist. Tell them to watch him and so on. I hope that a neutral source will help them. But I think the thing I've highlighted there, which I guess is what we've covered also, is probably the most effective way that I've found to deal with this, is to demonstrate positive, happy alternatives. And that's very much taking a leaf from evangelists. You know, it's just really be positive. I mean, this isn't all hair shirt. I think there is, and I've always said, you know, there's a better world out there, a better economy, a better foreign policy for our global north, a better relationship with the global south, and for us in our own world to be happier and healthier. So as I think Anna was saying, just being very, very positive about the changes we've made. And I guess not to worry about, I mean, one of the things that people always say to me is, but you're just tackling the low-hanging fruit. You're not really dealing with the, you know, the people who go to Lidl 3 times a week and, I don't know, what, you know, 5 holidays a year or whatever it is. And I think, remember, there is big value in tackling the low-hanging fruit, because even people who are sort of signed up on the green agenda quite often still don't really know the facts, are still looking for guidance, are still looking for collaboration, and so on. And it's worth, you know, there's still plenty of change to be had there. Remember, we only need a few % to create this revolution. We are in a revolution. It's happening, and to make that keep rolling. So, you know, it's definitely worth disengaging from the difficult ones and dealing with the easier ones. I guess I'm find that what people tell me and what I hear myself, the most difficult scenarios are, and these are just some, and you'll have others to add to it. I just want to I mean, people often immediately bring up that issue about, but what about the poor? They can't afford to make the changes that you can make. And I just wonder, do you hear that argument come up? Okay, so what sort of answers do you come up with for that? What do you know, where do you, yeah, go on.
I can only be responsible for myself, for my choices.
You can only be responsible for yourself, right. Okay. Anybody else got yeah, go on, Anna.
Well, things like green energy these days are similar to the fossil fuels, so it's the same price. And actually, if you're looking at a renewable, sustainable future, it's about having, you know, fairer prices for people and eliminating fuel poverty. And there are mechanisms like, you know, eco-funding and stuff for people to retrofit their homes. So there are mechanisms to help people, whatever their income level to some extent.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found similar actually, and I was guilty of this kind of concept that it costs more to be ethical. But recently we've got this great new shop in Frome called Denewed, and I hadn't been in, even though it had been open 3-4 months.
Yeah.
Because in my head I thought that's going to be organic prices, I can't afford it. Just happened to have a day off work and thought, well, I'll just go check it out when I'm walking past. Did a price check, and stuff in there is cheaper than Asda.
Right.
You have to pick.
Yeah.
But so I got straight on Facebook and actually said that to my friends and relatives. This shop has stuff in it that's cheaper than Asda.
Yeah.
And it's like Anna said, there are alternatives now, and I think historically maybe it was more expensive. And I certainly found that when I first started this journey.
Yeah.
But I think
That's
those
changing.
alternatives are at least comparable, if not cheaper in some cases. But it's still about letting people know that.
Yes.
'Cause for me,
But it
that's
is a
been
lot
recent
also
discovery.
about choices, isn't it? Because I must admit, I always slightly bridle at this one. Of course, we all know that there's a sector of our society that really have no choices. They really are very much on the breadline, and life is very, very difficult for them. Most of us do have choices. And, you know, when people, particularly on the food thing, when people say they can't afford to buy good food, and then I hear, I don't use it myself, but I ask somebody, how much does fish and chips cost these days? And they said, oh, it's between £6 and £8 a portion. I thought, oh, really? I can do an awful lot of lentil stew for that, you know. And when I read that the average British family, you know, or the average British person eats out 4 times a week, you know. So, you know, actually, okay, we can't afford it, but quite often, I'm not saying always, but quite often, it's because of the choices we make. The amount of alcohol or meat or more expensive items that we put in our basket, you know. I mean, honestly, even, you know, a good organic dinner doesn't have to cost more than the average budget, but you do have to think differently. You have to want it, you have to appreciate it, and so on. So I always find that one a bit difficult. Does anyone else have anything else to say on that
I
one?
think it's a bit difficult when, you know, train travel.
Yes, yes, okay, that's true.
On train,
Yeah,
I can't say,
Yeah.
yeah, that's just as cheap as that 38 quid
Yeah.
EasyJet flight you're going to get because it blinking isn't.
no.
You know, and we do it because we can afford it, and I can totally
Yes.
understand other people just going.
Yes, yes, yes. No, I can understand that, and that is something definitely, of course, we need the government to address. I guess you then just have to ask how necessary that trip was, and so on.
But people are generally talking about somebody else as the poor person, not themselves.
Yes.
And I kind of also say,
Yeah.
but actually, people that don't have very much generally aren't using the carbon budget in
Yeah.
the way people have got
Yeah,
a lot of money.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Actually, 48% of people in this country did not fly last
Well,
year.
precisely,
Yeah. Remember, it's 15% are 70% of the flights. You know, it's a very small thing. So yeah, let's. Was there a hand over there?
I was just going to say the same thing. I saw a
Yeah.
graph yesterday that correlated environmental footprint with income, which is obvious. But
Yeah.
if you're on lower income, it's
Yes.
much less likely that you're going to be flying around the
Yes,
world,
yeah,
buying loads of
yeah.
stuff, having an expensive car. That's
Yeah.
so
Actually, can I just also make the perhaps slightly controversial point, is that people of my generation, we have, by pushing down the price of energy and food, of course, what we have done is inflated our asset prices. So what we've got now are extremely high value homes. Most of us are sitting on several £100,000 of asset if you own a home. We've priced our children out of the housing market. Even when they're paying rents, they're paying enormous rents. So life is very difficult for them. We are actually sitting very pretty much on unearned income for a lot of us. And yet we are still, I'm sort of saying we very generally, we are still insisting on, we need the cheapest energy, we need the cheapest food, we need the cheapest travel options. When actually we could afford more, we should afford more. By doing that, of course, in time, the economics would show that our asset prices would go down. But you know, we actually have we're in a very, very unusual position in our generation. So I just wanted to point that out. Well, sorry, one
Yeah,
point
just think, I mean, it's for me, it's about consuming less.
Yeah.
So it's irrelevant what my income is. I just consume less because I know it's the right thing to do. So if you've got a choice, like I need to buy a new sofa, but I'm not going to spend £1,500 or £1,200 on a sofa. I'm probably going to get one from Gumtree or something like that, or from a charity shop. So it's those choices, like buying all your clothes from a charity shop.
Yeah.
You don't have, you know.
Yeah.
I don't think it's just relevant. It's about your attitude rather than your income, to a certain extent. I know there are reasons why.
Yeah.
But I mean, I suppose to say to people who if they're on a low income, say, well, you're not really one of the very guilty ones, because it's some of the people who got the top end earners, the top 10%, who are actually creating 50% of the gases. So.
Yes, except that if you look globally, if you own a home in the UK, you are you're within the top 2 or 3% of the world's wealthiest. Now we can all point to the super wealthy, whose consumption is generally completely out of hand. But let's remember, I found this so shocking when I heard this not long ago. 2 billion people in this world still do not have access to a toilet. Okay, that's more than 1 in 4. They don't have access to a toilet. 1 billion people don't have access to electricity still. And remember now, we have food price inflation happening now. Okay, so when we carry on eating grain-fed food and so on, we are doing what we've done on many occasions before. We are depriving the global south. We will watch them starve while we continue to eat our livestock and so on, and feed them grains and so on. So, there are some really big issues with our consumption. But yeah, doing this. So what about this one? My daughter lives in Australia. How am I going to see her and my grandchildren? That's a really difficult one. How do you deal with that one when it comes up? You're stunned into silence. Yeah, I guess my answer to that one is just plant some trees. I guess if my granddaughter lived in Australia, I would fly. Hopefully not often, and I'd make it worth it when I was there. But that is a really, really difficult one, isn't it? In such an interconnected world, how do you deal with it? But just, do your best everywhere else you can, I guess, is the point. Where am I going to charge an EV? That's a real problem, particularly in our city. I don't know if it's so much of a problem here, but, it's impossible. Sorry? Electric vehicle. Yeah, I can't have an electric car. I need a car. Yeah. Sorry?
You can't afford them. We picked up our Clio for 350 quid.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get an EV for that.
Right, okay. But of course, most of us, actually, as far as I understand, in the car market now, most people are not buying new cars, whether they're petrol, diesel or electric, they're leasing them. And that is a very viable option if you want an electric car. And there is a very vibrant second-hand market. I keep being told about this place down in Shepton Mallet. I'm planning to go. I think it's next weekend. Anyway, second-hand EVs what's it called? Drive Green or whatever. But yes, there are really practical problems in there as well, of course, which are very hard to deal with as an argument. What about, I still come across this very occasionally, the sort of the climate denying, it's all sunspots, or, hey, we're about to go into a mini ice age, what's the problem? Do you have a good answer?
So, you might be right, and you might be wrong, but say you turn out to be wrong 10 years down the road and we haven't done anything, it's a bit too late. So I'm hedging on the side of let's do something just in case it is right.
Okay, I think I'd say that was a little bit too cautious, but does anyone else have an answer to that? Do you find yourselves meeting people who are still climate skeptics? Yeah?
Just talk about clean air and clean water. It doesn't matter about the climate change. You can't argue that we all want clean air.
It goes back to that great cartoon, doesn't it? Where they're, so what if we're all wrong? We end up with clean air, better food, healthier lifestyles and so on. Yeah, exactly.
Create a better world for nothing.
We create a better world for nothing. I guess, my answer to that is really, you find me, I've had this at a talk recently, and I just said, find me one scientist who doesn't think we have a serious climate problem now.
But the President of the United States.
Well, luckily I don't have to converse with him, but yes, he's not a scientist. That's the other question is, so are you a scientist? What's your background?
It's not a scientific argument for most people because they don't know the science, and when you start to hear the science, it's quite complicated. When you get the President of the most powerful nation in the world denying it, and then he has a lot, because I unfortunately do go to the States quite a lot, and there's a whole group of people who believe everything he says.
Yeah.
And it's
backed up by Fox News and all the rest of it. What's interesting is seeing now the splits in the Murdoch family over this. Jamie, I think, is really up against his father and Lachlan over climate denial, particularly because they own most of the media in Australia and so on, and a huge proportion of it in the US and so on. So, but yes, those are really hard situations to deal with. In this country, I still think, for me, this is the point. I'm not a scientist. I don't need to know how you look at an ice core or whatever. But the point is, when really we have 99% of the world's scientists on board now. And if you look at the IPCC process and how complex it is, the peer reviewing, every paragraph. I mean, I read, one of the scientists, she put in one paragraph in the land review one, and, that had 4,000 comments that had from fellow scientists that all had to be answered and then all agreed amongst themselves and so on. It is, that's why we're not going to get another assessment report till 2022. It is such a robust piece of work, every one of their reports. If somebody tells me they don't believe in climate change, then I just sort of say, well, do you believe in the tooth fairy sort of thing? It's sort of, what you have to give me the basis for which you don't believe it now. So whatever. And this one I find the most common one, perhaps. It doesn't matter what I do. It's the Chinese you need to worry about. Yes. Go on, tell me, how do you deal with that?
How do I deal with it? Well, for one thing, the Chinese are actually doing a lot.
Yes.
I think I'd say that. And then I just talk about our responsibilities as this country that started the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah. Yes.
And that we need to clean up our act, and everyone needs to do their bit. But we certainly are very responsible here.
Yes. And of course the point that the Chinese, if you're going to pick on the Chinese, are generally manufacturing stuff for us, and still their per capita emissions are way, way below ours. And actually I think particularly if we're talking about the Chinese, I think it's always good to remember they've made personal sacrifices that nobody in the global north would do. If our government told us you will only have one child and we will come around and forcibly abort any other fetus, where would Western civilization be? But the Chinese have been through this, They have made the most extraordinary, very, very personal sacrifices. I think generally, I sort of feel very positive towards them, except for many things that they're doing. But, anybody else got a good answer on that one?
The way that the emissions are recorded is that you're allocated the ones that are actually generated in your country. So when you see the Chinese figure, what it accounts for all of the stuff we buy from them is included in their figure. So it's not what they're using as consumers, it's what we're using as consumers.
Absolutely.
So, and that's something a lot of people, everybody should know that.
Yes.
And a lot of people don't.
Yeah, the embedded emissions, as we call them, what we import and so on.
That's often when you hear this objection, it's hand in hand. Well, we're reducing our carbon emissions here faster than other countries.
Yeah.
Because we're closing our manufacturing and buying units.
Yes, there's so much to be said about that particular figures. But yes. Sorry?
Shipping and flights, I don't think
they're not included. No, they go into no man's land, indeed. Yeah, go on.
But there's also the other kind of bit of the story of because I don't go into all of that stuff, particularly about China, because I don't know it all. But so if your neighbour were a rapist, it's okay for you to be a rapist. We know, we have a moral duty. It's right to do what we know is right. So that doesn't mean it's irrelevant in some sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, actually, of course, that's very much underpinned by the Paris Agreement, which was the only way we got those Global South countries to sign the Paris Agreement was on the basis that the Global North took this seriously and we cut our emissions seriously. So, when we don't, India in particular will still make the argument, hey, we've got tons and tons and tons of coal, it's the cheapest fuel, why shouldn't we use it? Because you're not even turning your bloody TVs off, Yeah, go on.
Well, if you wind back to where we had the ozone layer problem, it was realised, scientists said it was happening, and the world actually acted quite quickly because they didn't want everyone to fry with this gap in the ozone, and it was sorted. But it was one industry. Well, it was mainly the refrigeration and air cooling industry. It was a relatively easy fix because it was identified as, and it didn't spread over everyone's complete lifestyle, and there weren't so many vested interests. So it was done. This one's got much bigger reach. It's in everything.
Yes.
So that's why it doesn't happen.
Yes, it's all the structures of the world's
Politically
economy.
led as well, though, wasn't it? That didn't require
Us.
too many people to make a personal
Yes.
change.
Yes.
It was legislative.
And of course, the disaster was that we moved from CFCs to HFCCs, which of course are our most potent greenhouse gases, so we now have to phase those out. So anyway, okay, so those are just some of the... Are there any other scenarios you get hit with? Yeah, go on.
It's not this very last question, but it's something quite convenient for many questions. I use it for myself, and in discussions I can use it against others. In a sense, it's the principe Kantien, as we say, principle of Kant, which is if you have an idea or a behavior, try to imagine the world as if everybody was thinking like you or behaving like you, and then see, does it work? And then you find out, probably not. It's not perfect. It's critical, but it's a nice gauge to, and it's very useful sometimes in discussions.
So again, so basically, sort of saying, hey, the way I envisage the world works. It's a good template.
To test the consistency of an idea or a behavior, you try to apply it to everybody.
Yeah.
Imagine the world as if everybody was thinking this way or behaving this way.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yes.
Very often the answer is no.
Well, it's certainly a challenge how our economy is going to have to change radically, you know, to a no growth, zero carbon economy. I think most economists will struggle to see exactly how taxation, everything is going to have to change dramatically. It's not that we can't do it, it's going to be a very different world. And I think there's, as I say, much to be welcomed about it. But in the end, we don't have a choice now. We have to do it, if we want to survive. So, okay, what about this particular issue? I don't know whether it's a particular issue for anybody in this room, but I'm sure you know people for whom it is. That issue about talking to spouses and partners, because I think, I was married, and I can say from my own experience, there were always the longer the marriage, there are always some no-go areas, some things that you just don't go there because it's just, you don't want to rock that boat, it's just too difficult and too sensitive. And, your partner may have a very particular pet project or pet idea or pet idiosyncrasy, and it's just, that's untouchable. And of course, also people find they're intruding on each other's decision-making areas. He always does the banking. She decides what level the heat is. He decides the car. She does the recycling or whatever it is. And so, if you're the husband or wife or whatever partnership, how that's constituted, and you start intruding on that other person's area of responsibility, it can feel quite destabilising. And then, of course, also, the longer you've been together, the more you've got those joint expectations. You are a team. That's the point of being a partnership, isn't it? And you've got those joint dreams and expectations, spoken or unspoken plans about how you expect life to roll out. And now we're saying everything's going to be different. So, and I do know many couples where one person is very much more engaged with climate change than another, and that does cause particular tensions. And I just wondered if anybody wanted to air any thoughts around that. They don't have to be personal experiences, but if you've observed this in couples close to you, is this something you're aware of? Or?
I'm going to jump in if no one else does.
Go on.
Does anyone have the plastic tub problem? Like your partner brings home something that they've got that's a convenience piece of food, it's in a tub that at the moment isn't recyclable in your collection, and you just look at it and go, and then you're forced to eat it because you think, there's nothing else to eat anyway.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's your fault if there's nothing else to eat. But,
it's a double whammy.
So in that situation, obviously not you personally maybe, but would you let your partner know that actually you disapproved of that tub and that particular purchase? Or is it just a don't go there?
It depends on the day. Sometimes you're going to go, intake of breath. You really have to buy that. And all those days where you've been not buying that, You're walking past it and going, I'm not having that. I'm going to make my own hummus.
Yeah.
And then you don't because, like, you know,
Yeah.
anyway. These are the dilemmas that face me on a daily basis.
Oh dear.
Agony.
Anything anybody else wants to contribute there?
Well, I think something that might be coming up is heating, because with gas central heating, and you know, I don't think we are wild with it, but if we do need to change it, I don't know what to do. I don't want to be old and cold.
No, and nobody wants you to be really cold. What everyone wants you to do, of course, is dress appropriately and use the best heating, in the end, low carbon heating source that you can. Yes, but you remember 1 degree down on your heating will save you about 8% off your bill. I mean, it's extraordinary. And when I've been in courses where people have gone home and tried it, they don't even notice 1 degree down, you know. So we generally overheat rooms and all this. And again, it's a very much a welcoming thing. It's a hospitable thing, isn't it? I mean, I live on almost no heating. I have my thermal socks, big jumper and whatever. And my bill, my electric, I have no gas heating. It's all electric. My bill, my consumption last month was less than £10, you know. But as soon as I have guests, I feel obliged to turn it on and so on, you know. And that's that, you know, I haven't even asked them. They're not. I'm not waiting to them be shivering in the hall, or whatever. But I immediately feel I've got to sort of roll out that hospitality and so on. Yeah. And do anyone want to contribute any more? Anything anybody wants to say, or I'll move on? Yeah, go on.